Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I am the host of the Smart Business Revolution podcast, and I feel so privileged because every week I get to talk to smart CEOs, founders, entrepreneurs of companies and organizations like YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard, Lending Tree, OpenTable, so many others. I'm also the co-founder of Rise 25, and our focus is on helping to connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects and referral partners. And I've got a great guest here today. He's got an interesting background. His name is Mark P. Fisher. He calls himself the Chief Encourager with a company called Inspiring Growth. It's a company that helps businesses with everything from sales and marketing to fundraising with a specialization in hospitality businesses. He also has many years of experience working with camps, retreats, and conference leaders, and recently provided a webinar, which was really helping that industry, which has really had to pivot and find ways to survive, given that we're in the middle of the whole coronavirus pandemic right now as we record this. And he's also consulted with 146 different for-profit and non-profit organizations. One grew by 98%, another 23% with outstanding 99% customer satisfaction. And we're going to talk about that, how to get great reviews for your company in this world that we live in now, where there's Yelp and TripAdvisor and so many different review sites. Mark has also worked with AT&T, Nissan, Red Lobster, Nestle, Speedstick, and many more. But first, before we get into this interview, this episode is brought to you by Rise 25 Media, our company, which helps B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships using done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. And, you're listening to a podcast right now. If you've ever thought about doing a podcast, I say yes, you should absolutely do it. And we specialize with helping B2B businesses with a high client lifetime value to use a podcast effectively. So to learn more, go to rise25media.com or email support@rise25media.com. And Mark, so I'm excited to talk to you here. You've got a really interesting background. But first of all, let's just start with the fact that about 7 or so years ago now,
2013.
You were having a surgery, which went horribly wrong, and that inspired what you do today. So tell us that story. What happened? And you were paralyzed for a short period of time as well.
Well, first of all, John, thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to hanging out with you, and I appreciate the vision that you're casting for business owners and for podcasters. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. My story took a crazy turn back in 2013. I had been serving as CEO of about an $8 million nonprofit called Sandy Cove. It's a beautiful 152-room lodge on the Chesapeake Bay. And in the first 4 years of my leadership, I was there for 8 years as president, I had 5 stomach surgeries. And those surgeries, I think, were partly because I just didn't handle the stress of leadership very well. And I think some of it may have been genetic, but it racked my body with pain. And I started taking narcotics. And I was taking narcotics for almost 9 years. And back in 2013, my pain doc said to me, Mark, you can't stay on these things. Well, I already knew that because my wife came to me one day and she said, Mark, I don't know if you realize this, but our 5th child is being raised by a different father than the other 4. And for me, that was this wake-up call that I was getting numb to the world and relationships because of all these pain meds. And so I said, well, what do I do, doc? I can't just stop these meds. And he goes, well, I'd like to do, it's a relatively new procedure called a spinal cord stimulator. Have you ever heard of this?
No, but it doesn't sound like something that you would mess around with. Jeez.
Yes, well, that's exactly how I felt. I did, I Googled, I researched it, and spent a couple of months figuring out whether I wanted it. And here's the short story. The doc, it's an outpatient surgery, and he has a little incision in the base of my spine. He then snakes a wire up my spine. He then closes the incision and takes a cord and connects it to a battery pack outside of on my belt. It's like a 7-day trial. Now, he explained to me that this was not going to heal me of all my pain, but it would allow me to block the pain with the outside controller. So every time I started feeling all that stomach, abdomen pain from all my 5 surgeries and adhesions, I could block it. Well, that was the theory. Well, I can tell you this. After 15 minutes, I was in heaven. Not literally, but the pain was being blocked. It worked gloriously until it didn't. And all of a sudden, within, I don't know, I think it was about 15 or 20 minutes into this thing, I felt a pain course through my body. It was as if someone was pouring acid into my blood. And I started screaming. I mean, I'm sort of in the outside part of this doctor's office, and I'm screaming. He comes racing in, looks at me, and he's like, "What's going on?" And I was beyond myself. I was just in so much pain. So he told my wife he needs to get to the hospital. If he doesn't get there quickly, there could be long-term effects. Well, what we didn't realize is the doctor had accidentally cut a blood vessel in my spine, and I was bleeding out.
Oof.
And on my way to the hospital, I lost all feeling from my waist to my toes, and I was partially paralyzed. I can tell you, I am so thankful. I mean, I thank God and this skilled neurosurgeon, because when I got to the hospital, my wife was racing around trying to explain to everybody, he needs surgery immediately. And she was kind of the hero of the story. Beautiful, redheaded, Texas-born wife, been married 32 years, 5 kids, 4 grandkids. She was a beast in the ER. I didn't know any of this until later, because that doctor did the 6 or 7 hour surgery on my spine, pulled out a bunch of bones, drained all the blood, sewed me back up, said to my wife, "I don't know if it worked. We'll have to see." And the next thing I remember was waking up in that hospital bed about 1 a.m, and all 5 of my kids were at the foot of my bed. And my wife was there, and my youngest son, Brennan, looked at me and says, "Pops, can you move your toes?" And I started wiggling my toes, and they cheered. And then they explained to me what had happened. And that is one of those moments I like to say that perhaps some detours are not detours. Perhaps they're actually the path. And that set me on an 18-month recovery course that gave birth to Inspiring Growth.
So you took a look at your life and you said, I got to make a change. This is not the path for me. I want to do something new. How did you know what you were going to do?
Great question.
And actually, I don't think was this your first entrepreneurial venture?
No, I started a business in college called Shine, and we used to wash and wax cars.
Okay, that's cool.
Pay for college, we called it Shine. No wax in your cracks, or your money backs.
So, how did you figure out that you wanted to advise companies?
Well, I knew that I had an entrepreneurial spirit, even in the nonprofit space. And what happened is the first 3 months, my board of directors at the Sandy Cove said, "Stay home, recover." So I did. And then about 3 months later, they brought me into the boardroom, and they asked me, John, the absolute right question any nonprofit board should ask their CEO. And that is, do you have the strength to get back on the horse? Let me ask you something. Has there ever been a time in your life where you knew the next thing you're about to say would change the trajectory of your life?
Sure. And that was the case
That's
with you.
exactly what happened.
Yeah.
Because I said, no, I don't have the strength.
Hmm.
And they were kind of surprised, and they were like, really? And I said, yeah, I know what this job requires. So we had grown from a $4.9 million nonprofit to an $8 million. We had just done amazing work as a team, but I knew I didn't have the strength to get on.
Hmm.
So they did something very uncommon, especially in the nonprofit sector. They said, Mark, please go home, come back in 24 hours. We're going to talk and pray and decide what to do with you. I was like, okay. Imagine walking into a room of 12 or 13 people, board members, really your friends, and the HR manager sitting there with her notepad.
We're going to find out what happens to me.
I know what's going on here.
Well, so I
hired, and let me just tell you, what they said to me shocked me. They said, we love you, and we appreciate everything you've done in growing this organization, what your family has sacrificed. So here's a 1-year severance. We're going to cover your medical, and we're going to hire a career coach for you to help you in the transition to what's next. Wow. And that, John, that's what gave me the runway to give birth to Inspiring Growth.
That's amazing. That's really
matter of fact, I want to tell you something else that you've really inspired in me. You talk a lot about the people in our lives that have made a real big difference in our life. And after you and I first talked months ago, I got this idea. Why don't I spend 5 days on LinkedIn and Facebook and call out 5 people in my life that have made a huge difference in my life? And so I wrote a story about them, because I like to say 5 years from today, you and I are going to be the same people, except for 2 things: the books we read and the people we meet. And so I called them out, showed a picture of them. Matter of fact, in doing that, one of the guys that I chose was the career coach that walked with me for 6 months, who at the end of all of the process of preparing me for my next gig said to me, Mark, you're an entrepreneur. You've been disguised entrepreneur in the nonprofit sector. Start your own business and just start giving your business away to every single contact you have in your 25 years of life. And so I started writing emails to presidents of organizations with the subject line, limping leader for hire. That's what gave birth to Inspiring. Actually, cool. It was called Payne Fisher Marketing Group. And about 2 years in, one of my clients called me and he said, Mark, you've really inspired growth in me as a leader, and we've grown 62%. And I'm thinking of running for the mayor of Prescott, Arizona. What do you think? I said, wait a minute, Greg, what did you say at the beginning? And I realized he had called out in me my why. And so growth. Now what I DBA is Inspiring Growth. That's great. With great leaders and their brands.
That's great. And thank you for sharing that story. I love that you did that. I think everyone could learn from that. So everyone listening to this, if you just do nothing more after this interview, but going and posting on your Facebook or your LinkedIn or whatever, and just sharing publicly someone who's inspired you. It could be 1, could be 5, could be 10, whatever it is. That's such a wonderful gesture. I love that you did that. I want to go backwards a little bit, and I want to dive into your story a little bit more. You love stories. I love stories. What drew you to kind of the hospitality industry? Because you did a stint in radio, but then after that point, you worked with a number of different camps and retreat facilities and conference facilities, many of which grew tremendously. So first, I want to ask about how you got into that focus. And then second, I want to ask about some of the strategies that you employed in order to grow them.
Great question. I was 16 years old in Northern Virginia, and my mom had a faith experience, and our neighbors invited her and me to go to this camp in the Adirondacks of New York. And at the time, I was long-haired and hippie freaked, and I would sign my names DS and R&R, drug, sex, and rock and roll. And I didn't want to go to this camp because I heard it was a Christian camp, a faith camp. Mm-hmm. And all I knew about Christians were they don't have fun. That's all I knew. And my mom used a strategy on me that I still am embarrassed to admit, but she said, "Hey, Mark, about like 70% of the campers are girls." I'm in. And I had the time of my life. It was transformative. It taught me about my life, about confidence, about leadership, about humility. I could tell you story after story. Well, fast forward the tape. I was so impacted by that camp that when I was a senior in high school, I decided I wanted to go back and become the program director on that island on Scrin Lake in New York. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, someday I think I'll be a camp director, maybe when I'm in my 50s. What I didn't realize is after I got married, my mother took my wife to a conference where a well-known woman speaker was at a place called Sandy Cove on the headwaters of the Chesapeake Bay. And when Lori came back from that, after we'd only been married a couple years, she said, let's go together. And when I went, I met the president. I heard about all his struggles in sales and marketing. I said, hey, I'll just volunteer to help you. And one thing led to another, and I became the first VP of sales and marketing for Sandy Cove. For 6 years, I served there. I left, went out to a place called Glorieta in New Mexico for about 10 months, too long, and then ended up in California at a place called Forest Home, 6 camps, retreats, and conference centers in Southern California. And so it just got in my blood because I saw the power of camp.
Yeah. And I couldn't agree more. It was one of the things that interested me in your story because I went to overnight summer camps as a kid, like a couple of weeks. And I was around age, 10 to 12, 9, 10, 12, that sort of thing. And it had such a big impact on my life, even though I look back now and you think it was like a couple of weeks of your life,
Talk about the impact. What kind of impact can you attribute to that?
I think most importantly, when I went through other experiences in my life, like going to college or starting your first job or starting any new job when you're in your 20s, you're starting out in your career, I felt like I would be okay because the experience of summer camp often is you're being dropped off first time without your family in so a foreign place, oftentimes without knowing anyone there. You have to comply by other people's rules, all kinds of rules, right? It's just such a different experience. And at least my experience it was really hard, but then you adjust and then you love it. And by the time you leave a week or two later, you're just transformed. That's the best way I can describe it.
And I think what you just described, John, is something that I've watched thousands of young people, including myself, experience, which is, and most people can't articulate this, especially in our youth, but our parents trusted us. Now, they may have just wanted to get rid of us for a little while, but there was this level where we were given some level of trust and freedom.
Yeah.
And then in that space of freedom, we could literally be whoever we wanted to be because almost nobody knew us.
Yeah.
Sometimes it was about reinventing ourselves in a residential, creation-driven, counselor-focused environment. And I got to tell you, most kids grow up in camp. They're given opportunities to lead and create and learn and I just see, it's funny because as soon as you and I first talked, I heard about your camp experience and I realized you're a leader, you're a visionary. I think a lot of those seeds were planted at a camp. You just didn't realize it.
I think so too. I mean, you meet a new group of other kids and you have to adapt really quickly and you're going to get along with some and you're not going to get along with others. And you have to navigate that without your parents' support for the first time in your life and, seek out mentors in the form of other counselors or older kids, counselors in training, that sort of thing.
Yep.
And just everything about it is an amazing adventure. And you learn skills too that you never maybe haven't explored at all before because the camp stretches you and forces you to try new things. And it was just for me, it was an amazing experience. And so, my oldest is hitting that age now. Unfortunately, this summer it's not happening, but I'm hoping he's 9. So okay. He's hitting that age. So I'm hoping next summer, he's going to go back to the camp that I went to, which is Belknap, which is on Lake Winnipesaukee. It's in Wolfboro, New Hampshire.
Right on.
It's been there for over 100 years. It looks exactly the same as it did 100 years ago, and that's what
That's
I
a
love
blessing
about it.
and a curse, by the way.
Yeah, is it?
Yeah, oh yeah, because camps like to stay the same, and then they don't innovate,
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
and then they die.
Yeah, that's a good point. So that's a great question. So how does a camp then preserve its identity and also not suffer that trap of failing to innovate?
Ooh, great question. So when I was hired by Sandy Cove, there was a lot of downward spiral in registration and revenues and so forth. And it was almost, it started in the 40s. So what I did is I went in and I asked everybody who worked there a series of questions. What do you love? What would you keep? What would you get rid of? Those kinds of questions. And it took me about 8 months to chart a course, but I spent a lot of time studying the founder. And the founder started this and that and this and that. It was a really amazing story. And I realized that I was standing on the shoulders of an innovator. That because people were a little put off by some of my changes. And they would say things like, our founder would have never done that. And I had to get a tough skin. And I said, actually, our founder was an innovator, and that's what we're doing right now. So I hope you'll stay around, but this is the direction we're going. So I think it's partly in the history. Got to really understand the history before you can make changes. I think it's also listening to the customers, asking questions of the guests and the people who use it. I remember the first week I saw this, it was a thing, kind of a conference with adults, and nobody was talking to them and each other. And I was like, what is going on? So I started asking questions. The more I learned about why they were there and what their history was, I realized we could shape an experience that would change this into a connecting experience and not just a content dumping experience. And so I think for anyone to innovate, they have to really ask questions. That's the core of inspiring growth, curiosity. And the curiosity creates focus, and then focus tells a new story.
So how did you make it into a connection experience? What did you do? What was the change?
Well, so in the case of 5 weeks in the summertime, we changed the focus to being this conference experience where adults came in and heard a speaker dump into their brains. And we changed it to what we call family camp. And we encouraged kids instead of pushing them aside. And we said, moms and dads have a hard time throughout the year connecting with their kids. What if we create an experience where they connect with God and each other in a beautiful creation that creates transformation in their family? So we cast that new vision, and some people were pissed. They were just mad because I was taking something away. I remember one time a guy called me, he goes, single old guy, he says, why'd you do away with the Memorial Day march? We used to go around with a flag on Memorial Day. And I said, well, we're doing family camp now, Memorial Day weekend. He goes, well, I don't have a family. I said, well, it's not for you anymore. And then he punched me in the face, and that was the end of that. No,
Did he?
No.
Oh, jeez.
I said, we have these 3 things for you. And I learned how to say no, but yes. No, that's not for you anymore. But yes, here are 3 things you can choose from, because we're building this thing called family camp for this audience. And we started to see our average age come down. And then we saw this boom in attendance. And then on Thursday night, we did a fundraising banquet, and that began to fund all of the improvements for the future, because those people loved what was happening in their families. The problem was that old organization was like a cruise ship. And I was acting like I was on a jet ski. And I was making turns left and right really quick, which I think contributed to a lot of my stress and health issues.
So how do you get everyone else who's been there for a while, used to things being a certain way? How do you get their buy-in? How do you rally them around the new vision?
Well, I think, there's an old fundraising principle that money follows vision. So I think once you can cast a clear vision that answers the question, what's in it for me, then and others, I think then you start asking your team, hey, is that where you want to go? And if not, that's okay. You got hired for a different vision. This is the vision. So maybe it's time for you to move on. And the more you get people who buy into that vision and that mission and that purpose, then all you see is excitement and innovation and ideas. I remember I hired a young guy who started in the dish pit at San Diego. And I made him in charge of the programs, family camp and so forth. And I said to him one day, listen, this is my philosophy. I'm going to cast a vision. You figure out how to get there in whatever creative, innovative, fun, missionally focused way you want to. He goes, like, give me an example. I said, well, now Sandy Cove is on the headwaters of the Chesapeake Bay. So I looked across the water and I said, on the other side over there is a town. I'd like to get to that town by Thursday, and I have $1,000. You tell me how. I'll do whatever you need to get there. And he was like, I get it now. And so as I began to say, our target audience here are families or women or senior adults or whatever the target audience is, then he created a mission-minded program that met the needs of those people. And you want to hear the funniest part of this story? He's now the president.
Oh, cool. Good hire then. So talk about some of the different, in my introduction here, I mentioned that some of the different for-profit and nonprofit organizations that you've, one grew 98%, another got 99% satisfaction rate. I'll ask you about that, about getting reviews and ratings and the importance of that right now in a moment. But talk about some of the different growth strategies you've employed, or tell me a story about one of your clients that you've helped with a growth strategy that's led to some stunning growth figures.
Yeah. So I'll tell you about Angeles Crest out in Los Angeles. They were stuck at about $800,000 of revenue a year, small little camp that rented property from the National Forest Service. And when I got in, I started doing what I do, and that is, there's no mystery to how I inspire growth. It's with curiosity, focus, and stories. So I asked a bunch of questions. And one of the questions I asked one day was, how much do we charge for 2 nights, 5 meals for a retreat at your camp? And they told me. I said, when was the last time we raised prices? And they said, we haven't in 3 to 5 years. I said, well, what if we raise prices? Oh, I don't know if we can, should. People will say no. I said, well, let's do a comparative analysis. So we did. Every year since I started with that organization, we've raised the price. And we've gone from $800,000 to $1.4 million. Now, that was just one thing. The second thing is, this is a little known secret in the nonprofit sector. Did you know that Google will give a nonprofit up to $10,000 worth of free advertising every month?
Wow.
It's called the Google Grant Program.
Wow.
So what I do is help my clients apply for the grant, get the grant, and then we manage all of the Google AdWords, because the old way was they would go down, talk to people, invite them in. Well, you and I both know that the new way that people decide where they're going is they Google it.
Yeah. So
then we built a Google campaign based on targeted things within the LA region, and we saw our attendance jump. So, one of those statistics, we had a 58% increase in revenues over the course of just about 18 to 20 months.
Wow.
So it was asking questions, finding what was going on before, because we all become myopic. We keep doing what we do until someone says, well, hey, what about this? And if you're teachable and you're willing to try something, because this CEO was he was, as Patrick Lencioni says, he was humble and hungry. Mm-hmm. And he would say he's smart because he hired me.
And talk about, I know one of the strategies you employed, you've advised conference facilities and started, for example, a writers conference, or started a festival using the facilities just as a way of leveraging the facilities further, filling it with another event. So talk about that strategy.
I call it the surfboard strategy. Because people come to me and say, hey, I've got a great idea. Like, for example, I want to do this huge event. And I say, well, are there waves out there that are telling you that event will have a lot of people? Well, I don't know. I said, well, let's find the waves that are already existing, and let's put our surfboard in
Right.
front of the wave.
Right. In other words, you can't just say we're having a writers conference. You got to get the writers to come. There's got to be enough interest out there.
There has to be interest. And now with Google, you can do Google keyword searches to find out what people are searching for.
Yeah.
And you can make a very data-driven decision about, will people want to do that? Now, that example was a place out in New Mexico where it's called Glorieta. It's a conference center, huge, 2,300 acres, middle of nowhere. But what I started seeing was Albuquerque has this big, huge thing with balloons. You know, those balloons that go, hot air balloons?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And I was like, what? There's thousands of people coming to Albuquerque. It was adjacent to Santa Fe. I said, what if we did, and who are they? How old are they? What are they about? What if we created a senior event, it's at 50 and above, and which I qualify now. And we did this thing with the hot air balloons, and we housed them. Home run.
Wow.
Just, you know, it's that entrepreneurial.
Looking for that.
Where's that need that you can meet? I like to say, you see a need, you meet it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're running a little short on time here, but, you know, there's been a lot of disruption. A lot of companies are having to pivot, change plans, much like you did after your surgery, change your plans. So talk to me a little bit about some of the clients that you're working with and how companies are pivoting, how they're exploring new opportunities.
I'll tell you two stories. One, it's on my podcast, the Inspiring Growth Podcast, episode 29, and it's The Secret of Transition. And it's the story of how one camp and a homeless shelter in Seattle got together and realized camp was closed, homeless shelters were overflowing. They decided to get together and have a partnership, and they're helping each other, helping people get off of drugs and who are addicted or homeless or hungry and struggling. One who was struggling looked at somebody who wasn't and said, what if we could do something together? So I think partnerships right now is a great and important focus. I'll give you another example. One of my clients called Safe Harbor Behavioral Counseling. It's mental health counseling. They do counseling both in person and by video. I was walking with the CEO one day. I do these walkabouts with leaders. And I was asking him, what percentage of your clients that call and want counseling end up not booking a session because of whatever reason? He told me, I think it was like 25 to 30%. And I said, what's the number one reason? And they say their health insurance copay is either too high or their deductible is too high. I said, well, what if we started a nonprofit to help fund the difference for people who have financial needs? So this month, after months of work, we gave birth to Harbor of Hope Community Services. It's a nonprofit to help people struggling to pay for mental health say yes to mental health. And we're going out and getting grants in order to fund it so that people can actually get help. So we're helping both those who are struggling, the counseling business, and so many people are being laid off right now. I'm actually saying to businesses, as an exit strategy to say goodbye, as sort of a severance to those you're saying goodbye to, what if you provided them 3 professional hours of counseling at no charge to them to help them make a step forward? What happened to you. Exactly what happened to me. I try to pay attention to my story.
Great. All right. Well, I want to wrap things up, Mark. This has been great. Very inspiring. Wrap things up with the question I always ask, which is, let's pretend we're at an awards banquet, much like the Oscars or the Emmys, and you're receiving an award for lifetime achievement for everything you've done up until this point. And who do you thank? And maybe the 5 people that you already called out on your Facebook and your LinkedIn, maybe others as well.
Well, it's hard to pick one, but I will pick one of the 5 I did call out. His name's John Ashman. John is a part-time cowboy and a full-time visionary influencer. And about 25 years ago, he was a VP of an association of camps around the country. And I was a young kid, and I was asking all these questions at the first convention. And he came up to me afterwards and he says, you ask really good questions. Would you be interested in helping camps all over the country increase their sales and marketing by doing some seminars, doing some things to help I ended up writing 2 pieces called Marketing Without a Marketing Director and something else. And John actually gave me a book years ago called Same Kind of Different as Me. He called me when I had my medical issues, and he said, I heard you're out of work, and would you like to start consulting? Because I'm now the president of the Association of Rescue Missions, homeless shelters around the country. And I said, really? If I can do it from my couch? And so he was one of my first customers of Inspiring Growth. And what that led to was a relationship with the author of the book, Ron Hall, who I am now the booking agent for. And we go around the country helping raise money to help get the homeless off the street and back on their feet. I worked with Paramount Pictures to produce the movie Same Kind of Different as Me with Jaimin Hunsu, Renee Zellweger, Greg Kinnear, John Voight, Olivia Holt. And it took me down a path because somebody believed in me before I did. So I'm grateful for John Ashman.
That's great. That's a great story. Thanks so much. Mark, where can people go learn more about you? What website?
Inspiringgrowth.biz. That's B-I-Z.
Excellent. All right, Mark. Thanks so much.
Yep. Thank you, John.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
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 And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.